I'd like to talk about the result of the E2E Automated Testing to improve productivity and quality. My name is Okuda from LINE Fukuoka. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I joined LINE Fukuoka in 2020 as QA engineer. After joining, I was in charge of the product called LIF, and I presented at last year's LINE Developers Day. And after that, I was in charge of the project of the authentication and authorization platform. And more recently, I am also in charge of the ID federation between LINE and Yahoo Japan and PayPay. Today, I would like to talk about E2E test automation as a part of the authentication and authorization platform. Today, I would like to talk about two things. First, about the end-to-end test automation in the actual project. When we say E2E automation, I think that there are many cases that automating the regression test that is included in the operational systems. But here, I'd like to talk about the automation in the early stages where most of the E2E tests were automated. And another topic I'd like to cover is the lessons that I learned from this experience. Before starting on the main topic, I'd like to talk about one assumption. This is the categorization of the function test. As a methodology of the function test, there is a script test and non-script test. In script test, the test procedure is fixed, and then based on that, the test is conducted. In comparison, here, this is the non-script test. This is the exploratory test and ad hoc test. So the content and the procedure of the test are not fixed beforehand. When we talk about the test automation, in order to make it easy to understand, I summarized it like this. So today, I would like to focus on the automation of the script test. So let me talk about the example of project. So here, I'd like to explain the project structure. There's a product manager and project manager, and the developers. There are about 15 developers and 2 QA team members, including myself. Next, I'd like to talk about the development process. We have a Scrum development, so this is 1 week sprint and conducting design, implementation, and test. So while the Scrum development is done, I was assigned as a QA team. So developers are doing test, and what is the role of QA team? After the implementation of all the screens, we do the scenario testing. Let me go into the details. Development team will test the function for each sprint, and they do not test a whole screen, but a part of it. QA team's role is that after all the sprints are over, we operate based on the scenario and then check whether there are no problems on each screen. And in order to conduct the scenario testing during the development, we plan to have a scenario test planning. For this scenario test, we had more than 30 screens. Here it says as is, so that means that this was the procedure that we planned to do when we started and participated in this project. So for example, when you try to make a test planning for more than 30 screens, what do you think about? Frankly speaking, I struggled with the planning of the test for more than 30 screens. Because we don't know the specifications very well, and it's very difficult to do the test planning. Even if you know the specification, it is difficult to plan for such a large-scale test. So I was struggling with it, and let me explain how we dealt with this. What we did, there are two things. One is to divide big tasks, and the second is the test automation. So let me first explain the dividing big tasks. So major task here is the scenario test for more than 30 screens. So the issues of this task is, first of all, high planning volume. Second, not understanding the specifications because we just joined this project. The third is the risk of bugs, because we have more than 30 screens. We don't know how many bugs there would be. In order to deal with those issues, we divided the test process into two. So how did we do that? So before conducting the scenario tests, which were to be conducted, the E2E testing for each screen was conducted. There are three reasons behind this. First reason is to deal with the first issue, the high planning volume. So for each screen, we wanted to do the E2E testing earlier so that we can reduce the volume of the testing of the scenario test. So by doing so, we can reduce the test plan. Next has to do with the second issue, that is not understanding the specifications very well. Through the testing, we understand the specification. In addition to reading the design, as we operated the screen, we came to understand the specification, thereby reducing the difficulty of planning. Last is the third issue, that is the risk of bugs. By testing this beforehand to some extent, we can reduce the initial bugs. By doing so, after the start of the test, we wanted to reduce the risk. So this was about dividing big tasks. Next thing we did was the test automation. There are two things that I want to explain as a background of this. One of the background, as I mentioned earlier, the dividing the big task does also have some disadvantages. This is a Scrum development, so each week there is a new function being released to the development environment. So, as I explained, dividing the test and conduct the test beforehand, then it would be necessary to do the retesting. Another reason for test automation is that this is for after the launch, but in the future this system will be maintained with a small group of people for the long term. This is the internal system. So basically, this will be utilized for the long term without being suspended all of a sudden. So this will be used for a long time, but at certain timing, the size of the development team will be reduced. Therefore, although there are a lot of screens, small group will need to continue to conduct the development and testing.
Let me summarize what I have explained. So E2E testing will be conducted proactively, and then frequently we have to do regression testing. And the post-launch assumption is that we need to maintain a large scope of maintenance with a small number of people. To address this issue, I chose test automation as a solution. I will talk about test automation from here on. I would also like to introduce the tools that we use to perform the automation. We use the non-coding tool called MagicPod. Let me briefly explain this tool. It is a tool that allows anyone to automate E2E testing with no code. It can automate both browser and mobile apps. Line has an enterprise contract with MagicPod. It has a track record of implementing the project. In this case study, we are using MagicPod for E2E test automation in the browser. So let me talk about the contents of the test automation. First thing we did is to eliminate manual tests to the extent possible. So let me talk about how we did it. But before I talk about reducing the manual tests, I should first explain a little bit about general automation and regression tests. When you have script tests and non-script tests, as I mentioned earlier, test automation will fit into the script test. For example, you may start with the initial manual test and extract part of it for regression test. And there are some tested manually and others automatically, so that will be the overall flow. The automation that I ran in this example is an attempt to automate the script test from the beginning with MagicPod. And all the script tests created with MagicPod will be put to regression test. And that is done every day. We did not plan to automate what is not suitable for the automation. But the basic policy is to promote test automation rather than manual testing. You may ask why the automation is the basic policy, why that will be the basics. That is because automation will enhance both quality and productivity. Let me explain specifically what I mean by quality and productivity improvement. First, there are two thoughts on quality improvement. First, after a test is done, the test can be made into a regression test. We can confirm the tested function runs as it's supposed to do. So it's about maintaining the quality. Secondly, conducting regression tests during the development period. We can detect bugs which occur in the development phase. If we want to do these, keeping quality and quick failure recovery, automatic testing is more suitable than manual testing, hence the basic policy. You can probably understand the point that I made on the quality, but you may have a question. Could the making all of these automatic testing result in loss of productivity? I would give you a conclusion first. We expected productivity would increase by automation. That's why we decided to take on this challenge. To explain the productivity, let me first talk about the manual testing dominant process compared to the automated testing process that I used. On the left-hand side, you see the manual test. There is a design document that will be an input to a test. You design a test and implement the test, describing each test procedure in text. Following that procedure, you would manually test and, if necessary, get evidence. What I did is similar up to the test design phase. But the difference is in the test implementation and later. It is implemented with MagicPod, not with the text. When the implemented test is executed by the MagicPod, it will generate the evidence of execution, often in the form of hard copy of each procedure. If you compare in terms of productivity, it depends on the granularity of the original test implementation and on how familiar you are with the MagicPod. Personally, though, I do not believe there is not much difference in required resources between the text-based implementation and MagicPod. Having said that, since test execution and evidence capture are automated, so all in all, I would expect automation is more productive. Talking about the test implementation, the first implementation, in addition to initial test creation, you would have to take care of maintenance resources required. As I mentioned, during the test, you may have to modify the UI, which in some cases would result in the modification of the automated testing itself. In such a case, by tapping into MagicPod functions, even when the UI is modified, we made a test. The way the needed maintenance resources would not increase substantially. The specific MagicPod functions we used include shared variables, shared steps, shared UI capture, and data patterns. I'm not going into the details of these, but by utilizing these functions effectively, you can make tests so that when the UI specification changes, So these are the reasons why I thought the automation is good for both quality and productivity. Now I'd like to explain whether we achieve the intended result or not. We have completed the development and the E2E test of UI unit test, and we've just entered into the testing phase. Up to now, all the script tests have been automated. The test cases of all the 37 screens to be tested have been implemented with MagicPod. In total, 600 cases have been created and operated. As I've explained, we have created 37 screens and 600 test cases. For the quality perspective, regarding the first point of product quality, we now have a system to run and finish all the test cases in about 1 hour every day. On the second point of quick bug discovery, when a failure occurs due to modification, when a bug occurs on the same day, we run regression tests and found the bug. So we have kept the quality level and found bugs quickly. When it comes to productivity, to run all of these automatic tests, we have a QA team, 2 of us, to create cases and operate them. As I mentioned earlier, by utilizing MagicPod, we have been able to reduce the necessary resources. As we work on this challenge, of course we struggled, but by introducing total automation, we have been able to see the clear result in terms of quality and productivity improvement. So as I've explained, we did get the expected outcome. Now I'd like to introduce 2 other benefits. First, having the automated testing contribute to development. Several times, our development team studied the possibility of refactoring. Refactoring indicates unchanged specifications. For example, unifying the processing for improvement. We had unification impacting almost all screens. Asking if there is any problem before and after the modification, usually one will have to cover a wide range of scope of testing.
However, from the development team, there was an opinion that the QA team's regression test has a wide coverage, so let's do the refactoring. I have heard of the examples where the automated regression tests lead to the less anxiety about the modification. But when we heard this opinion in my own project, actually test has a defensive image, but I recognize that the test could be also offensive. If I may make some additional comments, when the manual test remains, then the test everything is not very easy. I thought that the fact that automated tests having wide coverage lead to this kind of opinion. And also, since the natural language is not used, there is a productivity and quality improvement of the test. This is the slide that I used when I compared the productivity. So the natural language is when the test procedure is written in a text such as Japanese language, and when the MagicPod command is used, it's a computer language. Maybe some of you have never used MagicPod, so I'd like to give you the image of how you can create a test with MagicPod. So let me use the procedure of the login testing. Choose the command of the MagicPod and embed the specific value to the white box. So in this login procedure example, you would write the test case where you would navigate to URL and entering the ID and password and click on the login button. Now in comparison, in the case of natural language, using text as a procedure of the login, it's just written as login, or You can say that navigate to the login screen and then enter the ID and password and click on the login button. There are several difficulties in the case of natural language. For example, to what extent do you write the procedure? You need to write the rules and you have to be aware of the rule. And even if the procedure is written specifically, sometimes the information is not sufficient and test cannot be proceeded. So in this example, for example, the login ID and password specific values. If I may summarize, writing the test procedure in the natural language could lead to the variability or missing information. In comparison, if you use the MagicPod to write the text, you have to write the specific test steps. So no matter who writes it or who reads it, you can control the variability to a great extent. With less variability of the test procedure, the interpretation error of the test can be reduced significantly. So for example, while the test is conducted, you can reduce the test procedure error, and that leads to the better quality of the testing and also easy to do the review of the test procedure. When you say test automation, you might focus on the cost of implementing test. But when the screen operation procedure written in the sentences are converted to the commands, you can reduce the execution cost and improve the test quality and productivity. In an extreme case, when the test execution is done manually, if you use the MagicPod command, this would lead to the better quality and the productivity of the test itself. So far, I talked about the project example. So now I'd like to talk about the lessons I learned from those experiences. So in automating, I'd like to talk about the important factors and also two things that are given by the non-coding tool. So first is the key factor of automation. From the left, it's the preparation, beginning, and middle part. So this is the chronological flow of the test automation. So during the preparation, there is an automation planning, and let me talk about that. A year ago, when we decided to challenge this automation, we thought that it's important to come up with a good automation plan. Yes, it is important to have a plan, and it is essential. But based on the way I planned at the time was not very good. So what did I do? In making plans, I checked on the case studies of automation and I asked questions to those people who have experiences, asking whether automation is difficult, how many resources does it take. So I asked that question to people with experiences. And the content of the planning is no longer in the original form. So the way I conducted this was not very good. So I learned a word which describes the situation very well. That is the difference between study and learn. Both represent to learning in Japanese, which says manabu, but and the meaning is the same. But when we say study, it's something that happens in your head or cramming the knowledges. In comparison, when we say learn, you try something and you learn how to do this. So in addition to understanding it in your head, you will be able to do something with it. So when I saw this example, I recognized that I was only doing the study at that time. I was worried because I've never done it. So in order to compensate, I was asking questions and checking on the case studies, but I have not used my hands. So this is something that I have never experienced. So even if I try to plan for it, it will not work. So now looking back, I can say that. So based on that, what I learned is that, of course, plan is necessary, but after making a plan, you have to try to execute it. And based on the learning, you need to continue and repeatedly update it. Next thing I want to explain is before increasing the test case at the beginning, there is something that you need to do. There are two things that I'd like to share with you. First is about the process. So here I am comparing the process that I talked about. So I'm not saying that which is better, but if you listen to my presentation, and I want to go to the right-hand side, that is the automated test.
When you start a new project, you might want to start with manual test and think about automation later. That's a dangerous sign. With this in mind, let's say you want to run the process for manual testing once and then move to automated testing. What happens in this case? We can't suddenly migrate toward automated testing. I think there will be a mix of manual and automated test. Once the process increases, this is a good thing because you are making progress. But what's going to happen next is more important. Existing processes cannot be abandoned and moved to a state for automated testing forever. I'm not saying manual or automatic is better than the other. Once a process is decided, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of power to change that. And that means it is much more difficult to reduce the process than to increase it. Therefore, I think it is important to finalize the process as early as possible before the number of test cases increase. This is the first thing that you need to do before you increase the number of test cases. Next, I'd like to talk about how to create test cases. On the left-hand side is where you simply increase the number of test cases. Humans execute what you call automated tests. So the test cases are serialized. Now on the right-hand side, you use CI tools to run parallel tests without human intervention. Initially, it's very common, if you do not intend otherwise, to start with humans triggering a series of test cases. The regular parallel execution will be eventually essential for E2E automation. I'd like to skip details, but if you wish to move from the left to the right, it requires substantial modification on test cases. Actually, I built regular execution in about a week or so from the initial automation. It took me 2 or 3 months to run increased number of test cases in parallel. I had to change almost all 100 cases. In order to avoid such rework, it is advisable to build the desired structure first and then increase the test cases. I have explained 2 things you should do before increasing test cases. The common lesson is to construct the final structure as early as possible and scale. And lastly, let me discuss product quality improvement. It is useful to automate the script test as much as possible. This is a suggestion that I like to make based on my past year's experience. That said, combining manual test cases is an effective way. You may already know, but once you're done with the script test or regression test, you would not be able to find new bugs except for degradation. So efficient explorative testing or ad hoc testing should be utilized. For your information, I'd like to introduce what my team is doing. We operate the screen that is tested during the creation and maintenance of MagicPod test cases. Often we find something that does not fit the things that make us wonder if we enter certain values. So when this happens, we suspend the test, carry out ad hoc tests, and sometimes that will lead us to find bugs. Today, I emphasize the importance of automation, but in some cases, script testing is superior. in order to improve the product quality efficiently, we recommend non-script testing. That will be my last advice. So these are the things that I think are very important for automation. Lastly, I want to talk about non-coding tool and its benefits. What made me want to talk about this is another project on automation. This project used Selenium Appium instead of MagicPod. So we had one automation engineer creating and maintaining test cases. One day, this automation engineer left the project. That motivated us to migrate to MagicPod to allow the QA team to be able to deal with this. Unlike the earlier example that I talked about, we had manual testers in the team who had no programming or MagicPod implementation experience. We were there as consultants and assisting them. They had no experience, but on the same day they started to use MagicPod, they already started creating test cases. So everything seemed to go well, but once we reviewed the test cases they created, there was a lack of readability and maintainability. For example, since MagicPod functions were not utilized appropriately, when a change is made to a test case, it required substantial modification. Through this other project, we came to realize creating a functioning test case and creating a good test case are two different things. Let me explain further. In the beginning, they were not able to create automated testing. With MagicPod and other non-coding tools, as far as they have test skills, anybody could now make functioning tests. That said, to make a good test, skills on programming and systems creation become needed. And these skills require months-long learning, not just one-day training. After repeated reviews of this project, the team learned what test cases have high maintainability and readability. In this learning period, I realized that what non-coding tool can do for us is an opportunity to challenge ourselves for automation on the very day the tool is introduced. And we can also approach the E2E automation. We learn programming thinking as well. So these are the opportunities for us to grow. And this tool would give us these opportunities. Very fitting saying is that if you want to go fast, go along. If you want to go far, go together. What this means is that if you want to enhance automation in the organization, you need to go far together. Going far means E2E test automation and beyond, so integration test. It would be difficult to go far together with Selenium. But by introducing non-coding tools, we can attempt to automate together. And in that process, we will learn how to think from the program perspective, thus getting closer to the next level, that is integration testing. So non-coding tool is really a way to go far together. Now, this is a summary of my presentation. E2E testing automation not just reduced costs, but also improved quality and productivity. By deploying the non-coding tool, we have achieved E2E automation. At the same time, giving an opportunity for a whole team to grow. And I believe this is the most important goal. This ends my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Okuda. So now I'd like to start the plus talk. We would ask the interviewer to ask some questions to go deeper into the content. We would also entertain some questions from the audience. So please use the question mark at the bottom of the screen to upload your question. The interviewer is Ms. Hiromiko Hiroimaki of Yahoo Japan. Would you like to introduce yourself? Yes. At Yahoo Japan, I am in the Commerce Marketing Division of the Business Promotion Office, front-end engineer. I am an interviewer, but I myself, in my project, Otify coding tool testing is something we do. So the content of the presentation was something that resonated with me. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you. So what were the points that you were interested in after listening to the presentation? So more than 30 screens, and there are a lot of tests, I'm sure. So test scenario, how did you manage the test scenario? Yes, the management of the test scenario. Right now, for each screen, we create the tests. So the developers will come up with a design or drawing. So the item of the screen, for example, the items listed on the screen, or if you push this button, this event would occur. So that's the blueprint or design that we have. And for that, for each item, it's difficult to explain without the diagram, but you add one column, and for a particular item, the MagicPod test link is pasted to manage the test. So it's difficult to communicate. Maybe it's difficult to understand. Well, thank you very much. So in my case, there are many tests, and I was interested in how you manage that. So I learned a lot. Thank you. Next question that I have is that MagicPod, I have never used it, so maybe it's a strange question, but the test scenario granularity, what is the level of the granularity? Is it one screen or for each function? Yes. As I said in my presentation, there's a design drawing of the screen, and we manage the test. And for each screen and the function, we are aware of the items of the screen to create the test cases. But it's not one-to-one. That would be too granular. So the things that need to be bundled into one scenario is something that we do at the same time. But it really is up to individuals. So aside from the design diagram of the screen, E2E test scenario, the basic policy is summarized in one page. So the test case samples and the granularity is summarized there. So according to that, basically, we create tests. So to answer your question, basically the screen item is the basis, but we would consolidate it into the multiple screen, and as a granularity, we make a decision beforehand as a team. Okay, thank you very much.
I have another question to ask. Information updating and deletion, when this is necessary, how do you conduct this kind of test? There are many approaches to this, but in the test that I run, within the test case, we operate the screen and register test data, and then next we update data and see whether that is deletable or not. So that's inside the test case, not outside the test case. Updating and deletion, verification takes place inside the test case. Thank you.